He was found stuck inside of a chimney after missing for 7 years. 18-year-old Joshua Maddox lived in Woodland Park, Colorado, and had a love for nature. He had a free spirit, carefree attitude, and it was pretty normal for him to just get out and go for a walk. On May 8th of 2008, Joshua told his sister Kate that he was going to go outside for a walk. She didn't think much of it because this is something that he would always do, but later that day, his family noticed that he never came back home. They started to worry because this was out of the ordinary for Joshua. His parents waited several days before contacting the police, and on May 15th, his father is the one who called and reported him as missing. The search for Joshua went on for months, including authorities, family members, and friends searching around the area. But as time went on, people started losing hope of finding Joshua. Joshua's sister Kate hoped that her brother just left town, started a new life, and that nothing had happened to him. At this time, many were speculating that maybe he ran away due to not being able to deal with his brother's death just 2 years prior. His family didn't want to believe that Joshua was a runaway, so they listed him as missing. 7 years later, in 2015, a man named Chuck Murphy was demolishing his old wood cabin so he could make room for a property development. The cabin had not been used for years, it smelled rotten, and while they were trying to demolish it, inside of the chimney they found a mummified body. Yes, this body belonged to Joshua Maddox. He was found cramped into a fetal position with his legs above his head. And the sad part is, he was only 1 mile away from his home. A coroner believed that Joshua was climbing down the chimney to get inside of that cabin when he got stuck. His death was ruled as an accidental death, but Chuck, the owner of the cabin, said that this was impossible. He had installed a heavy wire gate across the chimney so that raccoons and other stuff wouldn't be able to get inside. The case was opened up again, and they were trying to figure out if foul play was involved. A major clue that wasn't discussed as much is that Joshua was found only wearing a thermal t-shirt. Inside of the cabin lay the rest of his clothes, including his shoes and socks, so it didn't make sense that he was climbing down the chimney if he was already inside the cabin. Joshua's death was once again disclosed as an accident, but Chuck was convinced it was no accident. There was also a main suspect who saw Joshua the last time he was alive, but since 7 years passed by, it was hard to get information from him. To this day, Joshua's death remains unsolved.
He murdered up to 100 people, including rapists, drug dealers, and killers. He currently has almost 400,000 followers on TikTok. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of infamous serial killer Pedro Rodrigues Filho. Pedro was born on a farm in Brazil in 1954. When he was born, he horribly had bruising and injuries to his skull as a result of his father beating and abusing his mother throughout her pregnancy. At only 14 years old, Pedro would commit his first murder. Pedro's dad worked as a security guard for a local school, and he would be sacked after being accused of stealing food from the school kitchen, which was something that he profusely denied. Furious at this injustice, Pedro would take his grandfather's shotgun, march to town hall where he shot down and killed the deputy mayor. He then hunted down the person who actually stole the food, the person who allowed his father to take the blame, and murdered him as well. Pedro would go on the run, fleeing to another part of Brazil. Here, he would end up falling in love and settling down with a woman named Maria Olympia. The couple moved in together, and Pedro joined a local gang. He would do jobs for them and work so that he could provide for himself and Maria, and also provide for his unborn baby, because Maria was pregnant. Horrifically, Maria would be shot by a rival gang member who was trying to get at Pedro. She was still pregnant, and sadly, neither Maria or the unborn baby survived. Consumed with rage, Pedro hunted down every single member of that rival gang, torturing them and murdering every single one of them. He would eventually be arrested in May 1973. He was 18 years old and had already murdered at least 10 people. While in the back of the police car being transported to jail, Pedro was sat with another man, both of the men being handcuffed. When the police arrived at the jail, they would be stunned when they opened the door and found that the man that was sat next to Pedro dead. Pedro had murdered him because he admitted to being a rapist, and the officers in the front of the car didn't even notice. Pedro Rodrigues Filho would be handed a sentence of 128 years imprisonment. But that didn't stop him from killing. While behind bars, he would murder another at least 47 men, and this included men that he thought deserved it, so that was rapists, drug dealers, and killers. He stated that he didn't murder because he was evil or he was bloodthirsty or even for pleasure. He did it for revenge. One of these victims even included his own father. Pedro's father was convicted of murdering Pedro's mother, and Pedro swore that he would get his revenge. He turned up to his father's cell and in a merciless frenzy stabbed him at least 22 times before ripping out his heart, biting into it, chewing on it, and then throwing the organ back onto his dad's deceased body. After serving 34 years of his 128-year-plus sentence, Pedro would be released from prison in 2007 at 53 years old, meaning that he had served just under 25 weeks for each of the 71 murders that he was convicted of. In 2011, he would be briefly reincarcerated for possessing illegal weapons and participating in riots. After 7 years of good behaviour, he was re-released in 2018, and after he was released this time, he decided to start up a YouTube channel. He would also eventually have a TikTok account. On both of these accounts, he would talk about how he had given up the vigilante lifestyle and that now he was an anti-crime advocate. After living a violent life, Pedro Rodriguez Filho would meet a violent end. He was murdered on the 5th of March 2023 at 68 years old during a drive-by shooting. The case into his murder is still unsolved.
This has to be the most terrifying hitchhiker story ever. If you've never heard Mary Vincent's story before, it's an incredible survival story, but I'm just letting you know right now that this is going to get dark. When Mary Vincent was 15 years old, she ran away from home. Her parents were divorcing. It was messy, so she was trying to hitchhike a ride down to her grandfather's house in Corona, California. It was September 1978. Times were a little bit different, so the hitchhiking was a lot more common than it is today in 2024. So 50-year-old Lawrence Singleton pulled up and offered 15-year-old Mary a ride. Crazy enough is that there were other people nearby Mary that were trying to hitch a ride, and they got really bad vibes from Lawrence. So they tried to convince Mary not to go with him, but she did anyway, which would be a terrible mistake. Lawrence Singleton did not look like a threat. Mary thought that Lawrence looked like a friendly grandpa. But not long after she jumped in his van, she started to get this gut feeling that maybe she was wrong and that she was in trouble after all. Lawrence takes a turn, and now he's taken his van onto a completely deserted back desert road to use the bathroom. And at the same time, Mary's in her head trying to plan, how am I going to get away from this man? She has this awful gut feeling. And at the same time, that's when Lawrence came up behind her and knocked her unconscious. When 15-year-old Mary regained consciousness, that's when 50-year-old Lawrence essayed her multiple times. Now, I'm letting you guys know right now that this is when this is going to get really disturbing. So Mary's begging Lawrence to let her go. She's saying that she won't tell anyone, just please let her go. And he says to her, you want to be free? I'll set you free. He goes into his van, he takes out an axe, and he cut off both of Mary's arms. He then threw her down a cliff and left her there to bleed out and die. And then somehow, I have no idea how, Mary, at only 15 years old, is able to muster up enough strength to cover her wounds with mud to stop them from bleeding, crawl out of this canyon that she's in, and then walk 3 miles back to the interstate. The first car that drove by Mary just kept on driving, but the second car luckily did stop, get Mary to the hospital where she survived and was fitted with prosthetics on both arms. Mary was able to give such a detailed description of Lawrence that he was quickly identified, arrested, and was found guilty of all charges. So you would think this is when the video is over. No, it's not. After everything Lawrence had just done and was found guilty of doing to a 15-year-old girl, he was only sentenced to 14 years and released after serving only 8 of them because of good behavior. And there's another victim in this case because of this. In 1997, after being released, Lawrence lured 31-year-old mother of 3, Roxanne Hayes, into his van, took her to his home, where he brutally killed her. His neighbors heard screaming and called the police, but they were too late by the time they got there. At this point, Mary Vincent is a mother herself, but she dropped everything to fly out to testify to put Lawrence away for good this time. This is so sick, and I'm so sorry if I start getting really heated, but one of the main reasons that Mary herself said that she was able to survive her attack, her arms were cut off. She was able to crawl out of a canyon, like a cliff, an embankment that she was thrown in, and then walk 3 miles in like the desert California heat, was because in her mind she was thinking, I can't let Lawrence do this to another girl. I need to survive. I need to put him away forever. She went through all of that just for him to be released early on good behavior. And now 3 children have to live forever and grow up without their mother, Roxanne. This time, Lawrence was sentenced to death, as he should have been the first time, but whatever. But he did die shortly later in prison anyway. Personally, this is just my opinion. I don't believe that Mary Vincent was Lawrence's first victim. I bet that there's a lot of unsolved murders out there on the West Coast that were done by Lawrence. But let me know what you think about that. So many of you guys suggested Mary Vincent's case. I've been batch researching and batch filming videos over the past couple days because a week from tomorrow, I'm actually going to be in Paris for the week. So if there's a video you want me to see, because I'm batch filming now for the next couple days, so I have videos to post while I'm in Paris. So if there's a case you really want to see me cover, let me know in the comments.
His headless body was found in a fish tank. 65-year-old Brian Egg was born in San Francisco, California, and spent his whole life there. He decided to live close to his family so they could always visit, and communication played a major role in the relationship. In mid-2018, the family's communication got weaker and there was fewer visits. Since Brian had so much free time on his hands, he decided he was going to help serve his community and would pick up trash from the alleyways. One weekend, neighbors noticed Brian doing his voluntary community service and go inside of his house, but that was the last time they ever saw him. About a month later, Brian's brother Devin called his cell phone to catch up, but it went straight to voicemail. Devin was alarmed by this because he knew his brother would always answer the phone. In addition to that, his answering machine didn't really sound like his voice. Devin tried to call Brian's phone again, and on the 3rd time, it was picked up by a man who went by the name of Nate. Nate informed Devin that Brian was taking his dog out for a walk and would call him as soon as he got back. But Devin never got that call. By the end of July of that year, Brian's neighbors started suspecting that he was probably missing. He was familiar with almost everyone in his neighborhood and no one had seen him. They informed police about this, and if he wasn't missing, he may be suffering from an injury inside of his home. When police went to Brian's home, there was no answer, so they left and didn't continue with an investigation. Police just assumed that maybe Brian went out of town and didn't tell anybody, but his neighbors knew that something had to be wrong. Within a short period of time, neighbors noticed 2 individuals going in and out of Brian's home. The 2 men appeared to be homeless and were using Brian's home as their own. Neighbors alerted police and they told them that they would look into it, but again, they didn't take this case too seriously. Since Brian had not contacted his family in months, his sister ended up reporting this to the police. On August 4th, police went to Brian's home to investigate, but once again, no one answered the door. Once they left, neighbors noticed what appeared to be deep and thorough cleaning at Brian's home. Soap bubbles were emerging from the front door and there was a strong scent of bleach. The strangers who were living at Brian's home were seen painting like they were covering something up. On August 7th, Brian's sister filed a missing persons report. About a week later, neighbors called police after seeing a crime scene cleanup company outside of Brian's home. Finally, police took this report seriously and ended up searching Brian's home. Police ended up arresting Robert McCaffrey, and he had been living in Brian's home for at least 2 months, and then 2 days later they arrested Lance Silva. The 2 men were charged with ID theft and financial crimes. They were caught using Brian's credit cards where they purchased a car. A thorough search was done on Brian's home, and about 4 days later, they found a storage room underneath the staircase. Once police went inside of that room, they found a hidden fish tank, and inside that fish tank, they found the torso of a beheaded body. It would be later confirmed that it was Brian's dismembered body. Brian's death would be ruled out as a homicide, and those 2 men were charged. However, the San Francisco District Attorney's Office later on would drop all of the charges, and to this day, those 2 men are free. Unfortunately, no one has ever been found guilty of Brian's murder.
He actually thought this was a scarecrow tied to a fence, but as he got closer and closer, he was like, oh my god, that's a human body covered in blood. It was the 6th of October 1988 in Laramie in Wyoming. Matthew Shepard was a really lovely 21-year-old guy. He was good looking, he was intelligent, he spoke 3 languages, he loved traveling. Had just so much going for him. He was the kind of guy who just made friends so easily. He was also really interested in politics and human rights. He was just like a really good guy with great morals. Matthew was gay and he'd had a really distressing experience on a school trip to Morocco. And I don't know whether this was a hate crime, but he actually got assaulted and arred. It sounds absolutely horrific. Understandably, this really affected him badly. He became very withdrawn, very depressed, very anxious, and it just really knocked his confidence. On this particular night, though, he was actually out at a karaoke bar trying to have a nice time. That was until he was approached by 2 guys. Now, this was Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson, and they were a similar kind of age, and they seemed super friendly at first and offered him a lift home. And like I said, Matthew was really friendly too, so it just made sense that he would want to make friends. They all got into a pickup truck together and drove off. 18 hours later, a cyclist just happened to be cycling by in a remote area and thought he saw a scarecrow tied to a fence. As he got closer, he was like, oh my god, this is a human being. It was Matthew, and he was in an awful state, and he was in a coma. See, the horrors of what Matthew had been through were incredibly difficult to research, so please do be warned before you listen on. They're so disgusting. I can't imagine a human actually doing that to another human. He was so badly beaten, he was unrecognizable. He was covered in blood, apart from, and this bit really gets me, apart from the areas of his face where he'd cried and the tears had washed the blood away. He was rushed to hospital, but he was covered in fractures. Just pretty much every bone in his body, it felt like, was broken. He was so badly beaten. He'd suffered severe brain damage, and he actually never regained consciousness. He sadly passed away 6 days later. And as if this wasn't bad enough, this bit really angers me. In this case, his memorial service was disturbed by members of the Westboro Baptist Church. And if you've watched Louis Theroux documentaries, you know exactly who I'm talking about. They're a very hateful group. Turns out that Matthew's killers actually had got into another brutal assault that same night. They'd punched 2 other young males, and police actually did manage to track them down. One of them had a blood-stained gun, and the pair at first had convinced their girlfriends to try and hide some evidence, conceal some evidence for them, and they had done this. Which is wild to me. Like, how on earth do you defend and help somebody who has done something so disgusting? They'd literally driven Matthew to the middle of nowhere so they could abuse him, beat him, and then leave him for dead. Russell actually pleaded guilty to kidnap and murder and was given life. He basically just wanted to take the death penalty off the table. And the girlfriends were also charged with being an accessory after the fact. I couldn't find whether they actually did go to jail, but I think that they did like a plea deal because they testified against the boys in the end. Aaron tried to say that because of Matthew's sexuality, it made him panic and he wasn't in control of his actions, which is a load of rubbish. He was found guilty, thankfully, and he did get life without parole. Hopefully Matthew didn't die in vain, because actually legislation has changed as a result of his death. Laws have changed massively in regards to hate crimes, which obviously is a positive.
This is the story of Lionel Tate. On July 28, 1999, 12-year-old Lionel was left alone with his cousin, 6-year-old Tiffany Unick, who was being babysit by Lionel's mother, Kathleen Tate. The two were downstairs playing while watching WWF SmackDown when Lionel's mother asked them to quiet down a bit. Now, around 45 minutes later, Lionel went upstairs and told his mother Tiffany was not breathing. Lionel told his mother that they were just reenacting what they seen on WWF. Lionel was 170 at the time, while Tiffany was only 48 pounds. The coroner's report labeled her death as blunt force trauma. She bled from her mouth, nose, eyes, and ears. Her skull was fractured. Her ribs were cracked. Even her brain was flattened. The beating Lionel gave her was so severe that part of her liver broke loose and was just floating inside of her body. Lionel was charged as an adult under a Florida's law, which does not require him to have had the intent to kill to be convicted of first-degree murder. They offered him a plea bargain, which he would serve 3 years and get 10 years probation, but Kathleen declined. She was certain that they would acquit him because the two were just playing, in her words. Kathleen, who is a police officer, and her defense attorney blamed the whole thing on WWF. They even subpoenaed Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in this case. Turning down the plea bargain got Lionel sentenced to life in prison. The judge said the injuries Tiffany sustained were gruesome and cruel. He was the youngest person in modern U.S. history to ever get sentenced to life. Kathleen was furious. She went on to do interviews claiming her son's innocence. She told reporters that she wanted her son out. He did not deserve to be in there. Her fighting paid off because in January 2004, Lionel's conviction was overturned, stating that his mental state was not evaluated before trial. This opened up a chance for Lionel to accept the plea deal that he originally turned down. He was released on 1 year's house arrest and 10 years probation. On May 23, 2005, now 17-year-old Lionel Tate was at a friend's house when they decided that they wanted to order some pizza. Lionel ordered 4 pizzas, and when the Domino's delivery man got there, he was greeted with a gun to his head. He dropped the pizzas and ran. He called 911 as soon as he got back to the Domino's store. Even though the police did not find the gun, Lionel was taken back to jail. On March 1st, 2006, he accepted a plea bargain and was sentenced to 30 years. He admitted to violating his probation, but he would not answer any questions about the gun. It was never found. WWF won their case with Kathleen and her attorney. They walked away with $3.5 million. All I want to know is, was he just playing? What y'all think?
She claimed that she was too pretty to be arrested before being arrested for the murder of her own mother. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Afaf Hussein. 29-year-old Hind Bustami lived with her 61-year-old mother, Afaf Hussein, on Juneflower Drive in Las Vegas, Nevada. The two women had a very complicated relationship. They didn't really get along, but not for a lack of Afaf trying. Hind was a substance abuser who struggled with her mental health, and these combined caused her to have regular verbal and violent outbursts, most of which Afaf would get the brunt of. It wouldn't be uncommon for police to go to the home after getting reports about a domestic dispute. Afaf tried her best to be there for her daughter, to love her and to care for her, but she actually began to fear Hind, even confiding in her friends / co-workers that she worried that her daughter was capable of killing her. In August 2022, Hind went to a Chili's restaurant that I believe was inside of an airport. She ended up walking out without paying for the bill, and when the police pursued her to the terminal, she was incredibly hostile towards them. She was shouting at them, calling them perverts, threatening to spit on them, and said to them, quote, "You're only arresting me because you've never seen anyone as good looking as me." Also at this time, she had an active warrant out for her arrest for a separate battery charge. She was released and was supposed to appear in court for this charge on the 30th of October, but before she had the chance, she would do the unthinkable. On the 29th of October, just after 2:30 a.m, 911 would receive a chilling phone call. On the other end of the line was Hind, who told the dispatcher, quote, "I think I killed my mommy." When the dispatcher asked why she thought that, she responded, quote, "I did. I murdered her." Police were quickly dispatched, but by the time they arrived, Hind had already fled. Security cameras caught her fleeing in a Honda car with a California registration plate. Inside the home, officers would discover the lifeless body of Afaf. She was lay in a pool of her own blood, covered in stab wounds and lacerations. Surrounded by shards of glass from a nearby broken glass table, and blood splattered all over the walls. We know from her confession within the 911 call that Afaf and Hind had gotten into some sort of verbal argument when Hind lifted up a glass table and smashed it over her 61-year-old mother's head. Using one of the shards of glass from that broken table that were now scattered all over the living room, Hind would proceed to ferociously stab her mother and, quote, cut her neck off. After fleeing the scene, Hend would drive 7.5 hours from Nevada to Barstow, California, where she would be arrested with blood still on her hands, dry and crusted. Upon her arrest, she immediately confessed to the murder of her mother, Afaf Hussein. At her 2023 trial, Hend Bustami would plead guilty but mentally ill to second-degree murder. For this, she was handed a sentence of 15 years to serve.
This man kidnapped and married his 4-year-old stepdaughter. At the time our story starts, this evil SOB, Franklin Floyd, has been in and out of prison multiple times for a range of crimes, including the SA of a 4-year-old girl. He's actually on the run. He's a fugitive with a new identity when he meets and marries this vulnerable single mom who has no idea who the man she just married really is. It was at this time that he kidnapped and ran off with her 4-year-old daughter, Suzanne, who she would never see again. Franklin and Suzanne would change their names and their location many times over the years, and Franklin would raise Suzanne as his daughter from the age of 4, but the entire time not only was he SAing Suzanne, but he was allowing his creepy effed up friends to SA her as well throughout her entire childhood. Despite all this abuse, Franklin was really confident of the control that he had over Suzanne. She had boyfriends, she had friends, she attended public school, and the entire time this evil, awful, dark secret never came out. In Suzanne's older teenage years, she got pregnant a handful of times. It's unknown who the biological father of most of her children are because Franklin would sell them, sell Suzanne's babies pretty much after she gave birth, but she was allowed to keep one child, a son she named Michael. When Suzanne started to get older, more and more people started to realize just how weird her dad really was. These people was actually one of Suzanne's friends and coworkers, a woman named Cheryl, who Franklin actually ended up unaliving, and I think he did this for multiple reasons. One, to kind of shut up Cheryl, and the other because he wanted to prove just what he could do to Suzanne, keep her even more scared. But now Franklin has just committed this horrendous crime, so him and Suzanne have to skip town again, new identities, new life again. But he didn't want to present as father and daughter this time in this new life. He wanted to be husband and wife. So he actually forced Suzanne, the person that he's had in captivity since she was 4 years old, into marriage. At this point, Suzanne is 20 years old and her son Michael is 2 years old, and she's actually considering escaping Franklin. But before she's able to, Suzanne is hit by a car. And it was Franklin who did that. Franklin admitted to doing that. She's in bad shape, but she's in the hospital and she's going to survive. But then Suzanne mysteriously passed away in the hospital after her husband visited her. It breaks my heart that this doesn't have a happy ending for her, but it doesn't have a happy ending for her son Michael either. For multiple reasons, Michael, Suzanne's 2-year-old son, was removed from Franklin's custody after Suzanne passed away in the hospital, but Franklin doesn't like losing control. He doesn't like losing the people that he considers to be his. Franklin actually went into Michael's school, abducted Michael from school, and sadly Michael has never been seen again. But it is believed that Franklin unalived him as well. Franklin was arrested and sentenced to death, and very, very slowly his web of lies and secrets started to unravel. Years later in prison, Franklin finally started to admit to everything, including who Suzanne really was, because at this point they still didn't know who she was, only one of the fake names he gave her. So at least Suzanne's parents finally got some kind of closure and found out what happened to their daughter 40 years after she was first kidnapped. But Franklin never said where they could find Michael's remains so he could finally be put to rest, and we might never find out where Michael is because Franklin passed away in prison last year. If you're still here, thanks for watching. I know this was an incredibly long, confusing, and devastating case, and I didn't even scratch the surface. That's how wild this case is. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and let me know what case you'd want to see me cover next.
This case is tragic, infuriating, and just plain heartbreaking. Aiyana Stanley Jones was only 7 years old when she was killed by Detroit police during a raid that can only be described as reckless. Back in 2010, Aiyana was at home asleep on her family's living room couch. Her family's living room couch, a safe space. It was supposed to be a safe space. The house was filled with her relatives, including her grandmother. They were just living their lives, unaware of the nightmare that is about to unfold. Detroit police were on a manhunt for a murder suspect named Chauncey Owens. They believed that he was hiding in the same building that Aiyana's family lived in. Instead of taking a careful, calculated approach, the police brought in a special response team, so essentially a SWAT team, and it was being filmed for the reality TV show The First 48. So literally, cameras were rolling as they decided to storm into this house in the middle of the night. Around 12:40 a.m., officers launched a flashbang grenade through their front window where Aiyana was sleeping, burning her body and burning her blanket, terrifying everybody inside. Before anyone could even react, Officer Joseph Weekly bursted through the front door with his gun drawn right at him, and within moments, Aiyana was shot. A bullet hit her in the head. She was just 7 years old. Her grandmother, who was literally sitting right there, says that she saw it all. According to her, there was no struggle, no resistance, nothing to justify the gun going off. But Officer Weekly claimed the opposite. He said that Aiyana's grandmother tried to grab his gun, which caused it to fire, but her grandmother said that she reached for Aiyana when the grenade came through the window, not for the officer's gun, because the flash grenade had set Aiyana on fire. That's the story that Officer Weekly stuck to, and they believed him, and the grandmother was arrested. But here's the not so surprising thing. The grandmother's fingerprints weren't even found on the gun. And even worse, the raid was so chaotic to begin with that the police didn't even double check which unit the suspect was in. It turns out that Owens wasn't even in Aiyana's apartment. He was in the one upstairs. Like, think about that. They didn't just botch this raid. They took a child's life in the process. The community was outraged, and rightfully so. It wasn't just tragic. This was a direct result of over-policing, systematic neglect, and a complete disregard for the safety of Black families. Now, let's talk about the First 48 for a second. The fact that this raid was being filmed for a TV show raises so many questions. Did the presence of cameras push the police to act more aggressively to make a good TV? And at what cost? After Aiyana's death, Weekly was charged with involuntary manslaughter and careless discharge of a firearm. But here's the worst part. Both trials ended in mistrials, and the charges were eventually dismissed. So let me ask you this. Where's the justice for Aiyana? This little girl had her whole life ahead of her. She didn't deserve this. And her family didn't deserve to have their lives shattered because of a system that prioritizes brute force over humanity. Aiyana's case became a rallying cry for those demanding police reform, and her name is now part of a long list of victims whose lives were cut way too short by state violence. May she rest in peace, and may we never stop fighting for a world where children like Aiyana can sleep safely in their own home. That's crazy for me to even say, but y'all be safe out there, and remember, these are not just stories. They aren't just headlines. They're real people, real lives, and real pain.
The body of a missing Washington woman was just found at a cemetery in Mexico, and authorities say she was tortured. This is Reina Hernandez. She was 54 years old and lived in Renton, Washington when she disappeared on February 26th of this year. Her friends last spoke to her around 10 that morning, and Reina said that she was going to a home in South Renton to speak with her boyfriend of 30 years. When she didn't return home and failed to go in to open up her hair salon, her friends reported her missing on February 28th. During the investigation, police found evidence at the South Renton home where Reina was last seen that she was taken against her will and likely kidnapped, and her car was also missing. It seemed as if she disappeared into thin air, but on March 8th, Renton police came across a news article in Mexicali about an unidentified body that was found in a local cemetery near the Tijuana highway. After giving authorities in Mexico information about Reina, they were able to positively identify her as the woman found in the cemetery. Her body had signs of torture. Her hands and feet were bound, she had been shot in the head, and she was wrapped in a blanket. Her car was also located nearby. A 61-year-old Renton man was arrested on unrelated charges, but is currently a suspect in the case. The man's name hasn't been released publicly, but according to Reina's family, he was her partner. Authorities believe that this was a domestic violence incident, as clients of hers from the salon reportedly stated that Reina did experience domestic violence, and even had a black eye before going missing. Right now, police are trying to figure out when and where she was killed, because if she was killed in the US, they're seeking to extradite the suspect. Raina was described as hardworking, empathetic, and she had a lot of love in her heart. Her family has since created a GoFundMe to help bring her body back to the US and to cover other expenses, so I'll include that here.
This is the story of Tyree Smith. December 15th, 2011, Tyree traveled by bus from Lynn Haven, Florida to Bridgeport, Connecticut to see his cousin Nicole Rabb. She said when he got there, he was acting strange, rambling about Greek gods and needing to get blood on his hands. Now, Tyree has had a long standing with mental illness. He's been in and out of psychiatric hospitals since he was a teen. So she didn't pay the rambling too much attention, but she did notice an axe in his backpack. But she thought that was his form of protection because if he wasn't staying with his girlfriend in Lynn Haven, he was staying on the streets in Bridgeport. That night, Tyree bought him a bottle of sake and sat in front of his abandoned childhood home and fell asleep until he was woke up by Angel Gonzalez, who was actually living inside of the abandoned home. He seen Tyree and woke him up and said it was too cold to be sleeping outside, and he invited him in. Once inside, Tyree wasted no time. He bludgeoned Angel with the axe, killing him instantly. He even went as far as taking one of his eyes and part of his brain. He carried it with him to Lakeview Cemetery, where he ate Angel's organs on his cousin's grave. Tyree cousin, that is. He washed it down with sake and slept right there. The next day, Tyree went back to his cousin Nicole's house, and as they were sitting there eating dinner, Tyree says, "I got my blood." And it was then Nicole noticed the specks of blood on his clothes. He described in great detail about the crime he committed. He said the voices said that this was his blood. He also told Nicole that he has a sexual lust for blood. Hacking Angel and consuming pieces of his body was a rush he's never felt before. Nicole immediately kicked him out of his apartment and called his mother. The next day, Tyree's mom called the police asking them to do a welfare check. She told them about his battle with mental illness and sent them to their abandoned childhood home. When the police got there, they checked around the house. They never went inside. And when they didn't see Tyree, they just left. Tyree disappeared for weeks. Records showed that he checked himself into a St. Vincent Medical Center on January 9th, but was discharged. And 2 days later, he was found in one of the aisles at CVS, bleeding heavily from his wrist from a box cutter. He was treated at a St. Vincent hospital, but released. Later that month, he went back to his ex-girlfriend's house in Lynn Haven. He showed up to her doorstep, asked him to come back, even though she didn't want him back. She agreed because it was wintertime and she didn't want him out there in the cold. But the very next day, on January 24th, he was arrested by the U.S. Marshals. They was clearly waiting for him to come back. 43-year-old Angel Gonzalez' mutilated, decomposed body was not discovered until 39 days later by some people who were interested in renovating the place. I'm sorry, but the police not going in checking when Tyree's mother called for that welfare check is crazy to me. After spending over a year in jail and going through many psychological evaluations, Tyree's trial started in September 2013. His psychiatrist testified, Dr. Rena, stating that Tyree retained his lust for flesh even after his arrest. He said he would like to eat more people because he has already crossed that line. He even offered to eat his psychiatrist, Dr. Rena. The trial only lasted 3 days. On September 11th, 2013, Tyree Smith was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He was committed to a high-security psychiatric hospital for 60 years. But wait. February of this year, the state psychiatric review board has granted Tyree conditional release. His psychiatrist said his schizophrenia is in full remission as a result of medication and treatment. How y'all feel about that?
An Oregon man who drugged 3 12-year-old girls at his daughter's sleepover was just released from jail into the public. Anyone living in Oregon who has kids should listen to this story because it's terrifying. On August 26th of last year, 57-year-old Michael Maiden insisted that his 12-year-old daughter invite a couple of her friends over for a sleepover. So that's exactly what she did. She invited 3 of her friends, who were also all 12, over to her Lake Oswego home for what should have been a night of fun. And it did start out that way. The girls spent their day playing in the sprinklers, getting in the hot tub, and then took showers and got got ready for bed when Michael told them to. The girls then spent the majority of their night in the basement of Michael's home having a spa night, watching movies, and doing facials. But at around 11 p.m., Michael came into the basement and gave all of the girls, including his daughter, mango smoothies that he made for them. Each cup had a different colored straw so they could tell whose cup was whose. Immediately upon drinking, the girls complained of the taste and saw that the smoothies had white chunks in it and white powder sprinkled on the top. But Michael insisted that they all drink it. 3 of the girls did, but one girl said that it tasted so bad that she stopped after 1 sip, which made Michael incredibly angry. And he did almost everything to try and get her to drink it. They each reportedly started drinking from each other's cup, which also made Michael mad. After drinking the smoothies, the girls became clumsy and woozy and they all fell into a deep sleep. All except for the one girl who didn't drink the smoothie. The girl who didn't drink the smoothie was sharing a pull-out couch with one of her friends that did, while Michael's daughter and another friend were in an adjacent room. According to the girl who wasn't drugged, Michael then came downstairs to check on them, and he did so a bunch of times. So much so that the girl became scared and pretended to be asleep, but she said that she could feel him watching her. At this point, she said that she was terrified that he was going to do something, and that fear was backed up when Michael began performing tests on the girls to make sure that they weren't awake. He would put his finger under the girls' noses and he would move their arms and bodies to make sure they were sleeping. At this point, the girl who was secretly awake could feel him begin to separate her from her friend, and so when he went back upstairs, the girl texted her mom to come and pick her up. She said, quote, "Mom, please pick me up and say I had a family emergency. I don't feel safe. I might not respond, but please come get me." End quote. Unfortunately, this was around 2 a.m. and her mom didn't get the messages. But thankfully, she was able to get a hold of another friend who sent her parents to pick the girl up. They gave the girl a ride home, who then woke up her mom and told her what happened, saying that she thinks her friends may have been drugged. Her mom then notified the other girl's parents, and they all showed up around 3 a.m. to pick up their kids. When they arrived, Michael initially resisted and told them to come back in the morning, but the parents said no and demanded to be let inside to pick up their girls. By the next day, all 3 girls were taken to the hospital where they tested positive for benzodiazepine, a depressant that produces sedation and hypnosis. When authorities went to Michael's home, they confiscated a Vitamix blender, a mortar and pestle, cups, straws, tramadol, and 5 bottles of temazepam. In just weeks after this incident, Michael and his wife divorced. He was married at the time. Last week, Michael turned himself in and pleaded guilty to 9 separate charges, but he has since posted bail and has been released back into the public. This story is exactly why I will never let my children go to sleepovers. You just never know what could happen.
Oftentimes I stay up late at night researching these cases, right? Like after my boyfriend goes to sleep. Last night I was up until midnight, way past my bedtime, researching this case. I was scared, like proper scared. Any little sound, I was like, what was that? What was that sound? It took me so long to go to sleep. I don't know why, it just gives me the shivers. We are talking about Elisa Lam, and I can almost guarantee you that you are gonna end this video with more questions than answers. Elisa Lam was a 21-year-old student from Vancouver, Canada. She was a smart, shy girl who loved sharing her life online, especially through her blog where she posted about things she liked, such as books and fashion, but she was also vulnerable and opened up to share her struggles with mental health, like depression and bipolar disorder. In January of 2013, Elisa decided to take a solo trip to California. She wanted an adventure, a break from school, a break from her routine. During her trip on January 1st, she checked into the Cecil Hotel in downtown LA. Cecil Hotel has a long and infamous reputation known for its ties to death, crime, and tragedy. We will loop back around to this. But at the beginning of her stay, everything seemed normal. Elisa called her family every single day to check in. All was well as far as they knew, until suddenly the call stopped. Elisa had plans to stay at the Cecil Hotel until the end of the month. On January 31st, she was supposed to leave LA, and it was towards the end of her stay that she started behaving very strangely, and I mean very. There is CCTV footage, the last ever CCTV footage captured of Elisa Lam, that shows just how off her behavior was. Elisa stepped in the elevator, but the doors remained open. While they were still open, she poked her head out, looking both ways as if she was looking for someone, and then backed up back into the elevator. She steps back into the elevator, almost hopping side to side while still looking around nervously, and then she pushes herself into the corner of the elevator, like a movement that you would do if you were trying to hide from someone and you didn't want to be seen. She jumps around a few more times, pushes multiple buttons on the elevator, the doors still remaining open. She covers her ears, rubs her arms together, waves her arms around. At one point, it almost looks like she's talking to someone. It looks like she's talking to someone, but there's no one there, and she appears to be disoriented or scared. Then she starts rocking back and forth. It isn't until she steps fully out of the elevator, walks out of the camera frame, that the elevator doors close for the first time. That was the last known footage of Elisa Lam alive. The calls home to her parents stopped. She didn't make make it to her next trip, and everyone in her life realized that none of them had heard from Elisa. That was weird, right? Of course, considering that she was in constant touch with her family. So because of that, Elisa Lam was officially reported missing by her parents on February 1st of 2013. But it wouldn't be until 18 days later on February 19th that she would be found. After numerous reports of hotel guests complaining about the water, complaining that the water pressure was low, that it was a weird color almost to the point that it looked dirty. Some guests even mentioned the water tasting strange or having a bad smell to it. Those complaints resulted in a hotel maintenance worker named Santiago Lopez going up there to the rooftop to check the water tanks. When he opened one of the tanks, he found the body of 21-year-old Elisa Lam, deceased, floating in the water. She wasn't wearing anything but her clothes, the same ones that she was seen wearing in that elevator footage, were found floating nearby in the tank. An autopsy was performed and her official cause of death was listed as an accidental drowning. But what do you mean? What do you mean, an accidental drowning? Yeah, okay, allow me to explain why in my brain that makes zero sense to me. First of all, those water tanks were in the roof of the hotel, a locked roof that required a key and a passcode to access. There were 10-foot ladders that you needed to climb to even get up there. The lid of the tank itself weighed 20 pounds. So you're telling me that Elisa did all of that by herself. She got into the tank, pulled the 20-pound lid over herself, and drowned accidentally? And I'm being serious when I ask this. Am I missing something? Because how does that make sense? This is the part of the video where we loop back around to the reputation of Hotel Cecil. That hotel opened in 1927 and it quickly became associated with unalivings, people ending the lives of other people or passing away, and disappearances over decades. It's also known in other true crime stories because infamous figures such as the Black Dahlia and Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, and others like him stayed there during their crime sprees, and in the 1980s and 90s, the hotel became known as a very dangerous and run-down location. It also had a long history of people believing it to be haunted. All in all, to say that this is a case that gets spoken about often, but one that there are simply no answers to. There are a few different theories that have been spoken about throughout the years, one of them being that this was a mental health crisis. This theory is supported by those who think that Elisa was experiencing a severe episode related to her bipolar disorder, which led to the disoriented behavior and accidental drowning. I've read that the autopsy showed that she did stop taking some of her prescribed medications, which I'm not 100% sure on, so I can't confirm. But some people do believe that to be true because of her erratic behavior in that elevator video, and some think that that kind of behavior could be linked to psychosis or mania. She just simply was not acting like herself. That same elevator video, though, is why others believe that this could be something supernatural or paranormal. Why did I say that word like that? Paranormal. Because it really does look like she's talking to someone or something invisible, and because the history that Hotel Cecil has of people believing it to be haunted. I myself do believe in all that stuff, ghost spirits, all of it. I do think that it's true, and I have my own stories as to why I think that's true. We could talk about that at a later time, but I do believe in ghosts. But even so, a ghost isn't going to take her to the rooftop and put her inside a water tank. And the third belief theory is that there was foul play involved. I think that this is the one that I believe the most, because if it wasn't foul play, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up in my head. There's a chance that someone else was involved and the case was covered up successfully or just poorly investigated. Because how would Elisa have accessed the locked rooftop and lifted the heavy water tank lid without any help? There were no clear fingerprints, no alarms triggered, and no solid evidence of her climbing in. If there was perhaps more evidence, I do believe that the most likely possibility is that she was being chased by someone, hence her behavior in the elevator video, and I believe that someone took her life and placed her body in the water tank. I just think that that makes the most sense, but even then, that still doesn't fully add up because her autopsy showed no signs of trauma. I don't know, it scares me, it stresses me out. If someone loses their life, especially as an accident, and then it's just kind of case closed, that's it. Anyway, that is all I have for today's video. Let me know what your thoughts are on this case, and I will see you in my next video. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in tomorrow's video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.